The day he fired her, he did not even look at her face, and that is what hurt the most. She stood there in her faded blue uniform, hands still wet from the mop, while the millionaire signed a single paper and said her services were no longer required. No warning, no explanation, no mistake she could fix. Just a cold decision made in a glass office above the marble floors she had cleaned for 8 years. Her name was Maria, and she had learned long ago how to swallow humiliation without letting it show. She was quiet, emotionally strong, and used to injustice. Life had trained her that way. She nodded politely, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out carrying a small cardboard box with her gloves and an old photo of her son inside. The employees watched in silence. No one dared to question the decision. The millionaire, Richard Hale, was powerful, influential, and untouchable. His company employed thousands. His name appeared in magazines beside words like visionary and genius. When he made a decision, it was final. Maria stepped outside into the cold afternoon air and felt the sadness settle in her chest like a stone. She had worked double shifts to keep her son in school. She had never been late. She had never complained. And still, she was dismissed as if she were invisible. At home, she told her son Daniel that the company was simply cutting costs. She smiled as she said it, but her hands trembled while washing dishes that night. Daniel was only 9, but he noticed everything. He saw the unpaid bills on the table. He saw his mother stare quietly at the wall after dinner. He asked if she was sad. She told him she was just tired. Meanwhile, in a large house across town, Richard Hale poured himself a glass of expensive wine and forgot about the woman he had dismissed. To him it was a minor adjustment in budget strategy. His advisors had suggested removing non-essential staff to impress investors before a major merger. Maria's position was listed under expendable. He did not question it. Efficiency mattered more than faces. He believed success required tough choices. But Richard's son, Ethan, had been at the office that day. Ethan was 10 years old and often visited after school. He liked to sit quietly in the lobby and draw while Maria cleaned nearby. She always offered him a warm smile and sometimes a piece of candy from her pocket. Ethan saw everything that happened. He saw Maria hold the box. He saw her eyes shine with unshed tears. That evening, Ethan asked his father why the cleaning lady was crying. Richard answered casually that business decisions are not personal. Ethan grew quiet. Later that night, when Richard was reviewing documents in his study, Ethan stood at the door and said something that would not leave his father's mind. He said, "Dad, if she cleaned your office every day, doesn't that mean she helped build your company too?" Richard looked up, slightly annoyed at the interruption. Ethan continued, "You always say this company is like family. If she is not family, then what are we?" The question lingered in the air. Richard dismissed him gently and returned to his paperwork, but the words echoed in his thoughts. The next morning he arrived at the office and noticed the floors were not as polished. The new contractor worked quickly but without care. A faint memory surfaced of Maria adjusting a painting on the wall so it would hang straight. He pushed the thought away. Days passed. Reports showed minor issues in maintenance. Employee morale dipped slightly. Richard ignored it. Then one afternoon Ethan refused to go to school. He said he did not want to grow up to be someone who makes people cry. The sadness in his son's voice struck Richard deeper than any financial report ever could. For the first time, a quiet discomfort began to grow inside him. He remembered his own childhood. His father had been a factory worker who lost his job without warning. He remembered the shame in his father's silence. He had promised himself he would never be powerless again. Somewhere along the way, he had confused strength with indifference. The helplessness Maria must have felt began to surface in his imagination. He tried to justify his actions. It was business. It was necessary. But Ethan's words would not fade. Weeks passed. Richard learned that Maria had not found new work yet. Cleaning positions were scarce. She had started taking temporary night shifts in unsafe neighborhoods. He felt a quiet stirring of hope that perhaps it was not too late to correct something. But pride held him back. Powerful men do not reverse decisions easily. Investors were watching. Appearances mattered. So he waited. He observed. He asked discreet questions about employee satisfaction. He walked through the building more often and noticed small details Maria once handled with care were now overlooked. A plant in the hallway wilted. A window remained smudged. These were tiny things, but they reflected something larger. Patience became his unexpected teacher. Instead of reacting impulsively, he began reviewing company policies quietly. He examined termination records. He noticed a pattern of cutting lower-wage workers before executive bonuses were discussed. The realization unsettled him. One evening Ethan brought home a drawing. It showed a tall building with many small stick figures holding it up from below. At the top was a single larger figure. Richard asked who that was. Ethan said, "That is you, but if the people at the bottom leave, the building falls." Something shifted fully inside him then. Not guilt alone, but clarity. The next board meeting surprised everyone. Richard announced a new internal review of employment practices. Executives exchanged confused glances. Some resisted. They argued that reducing staff had improved short-term numbers. Richard listened calmly. For once he did not raise his voice. He presented data showing long-term productivity drops tied to sudden layoffs. He proposed reinstating certain positions and establishing a protection policy for lower-income workers. The room grew tense. One senior partner accused him of emotional decision-making. Richard remained composed. He said true leadership requires responsibility for every level of the company. A vote was taken. It passed narrowly. The following day Maria received a phone call asking her to come to the office. She expected another rejection. Instead she was invited into the same glass office where she had been dismissed. Richard stood when she entered. That alone shocked her. He apologized. Not with dramatic words, but with steady sincerity. He admitted the decision had been made without proper consideration. He offered her reinstatement with increased pay and benefits, along with an apology letter acknowledging her years of service. Maria felt a wave of emotions she could hardly contain. Sadness that had lingered for weeks began to lift. Helplessness faded. She accepted quietly. When she returned to work, employees noticed a difference. There was warmth in the hallways again. Richard noticed too. But the true change was not in the floors or the windows. It was in him. He began visiting departments he had ignored for years. He learned names. He listened. Investors initially questioned the shift, but productivity improved steadily. Media outlets later praised the company's new employee-first initiative. None of them knew it began with a child's question. One afternoon Maria was cleaning the lobby when Ethan ran toward her and hugged her. He whispered, "I told him you mattered." Richard watched from a distance. For the first time in a long while, he felt something deeper than success. It was not dramatic justice. No one was publicly shamed. No empire collapsed. But something important had been restored. The powerful man who once believed he was untouchable had been quietly corrected by the simplest truth. Justice arrived softly, through a child's honesty. And Richard understood that real wealth is not measured by how many people you can remove, but by how many you choose to lift.